Hey, you guys, we're off this week, as you know, but we've got a couple of bonus interviews for you this week, one with George R.R. Martin and one with Henry Jacoby. If you want more philosophical information about the Game of Thrones, we got some answers for you.
Yep, we have this one from Terp Kristen, who wants to know, did you try to keep your book spoiler-free for people who maybe weren't finished with the series?
Yeah, that was something we worried about a lot because we realized that a lot of people that are reading the book may have only seen the TV show or maybe just read the first book, and we didn't want to ruin things for them. But what happened was a lot of the contributors felt that it was necessary to talk about events that happened in the later books to really make the philosophical points they wanted to make. So what we did was we put a spoilers warning page at the beginning of the book. I believe there's 6 chapters out of the 20 in the book that have some spoilers in them, and so we cautioned readers. We said, well, look, if you've only watched the TV show, you might want to hold off before you look at these chapters. But yeah, that was something we worried about a lot.
Now, we talked a little bit about this in the show last week, but were you a fan of George R.R. Martin before you started thinking about writing this book? And if so, how far back? Terp Kristen wants to know, did you read all the books first, or did you have this idea and then go read the books? How did that all play out? We see you have Arya's needle up on the wall behind you, so you must be something of a fan, at least by now.
Yeah, and I have my stick 'em with the pointy end shirt on.
Nice.
Yeah, Arya is my favorite character. Well, I was a fan of George R.R. Martin. I read one of his books, Fever Dream, which is a vampire novel that he wrote. I'd read that a while back, but I had not read the books prior to doing this. I mean, well, I did. I mean, I wasn't a fan of the show until I found out about the show being on, and then I started to read the books, of course. And then I've read every one of the books many times, which partly because I enjoy them so much, but also I had to really make sure that there were no mistakes in our book too, because the story, as you know, is so complex. And even up to the last days before the book was published, I was going back through it, and wait a minute, that didn't happen in Storm of Swords. That happened at the end of Clash of Kings, and that kind of thing. So I had to really know the books as well as possible. But I've enjoyed reading them many times.
This may be too big of a question, I'm not sure yet, but what were some of your big takeaways from the series and from the TV show? What were some of the main points that you put in your book about the philosophy behind this series?
Well, that is a very big question. We tried to look at the most obvious philosophical issues. I mean, clearly there's questions about war, and there's questions about the gods, and there's all the ethical issues. The different cultures have different moral views. What does that tell us? There's questions about incest and all sorts of things like that. The relationship between virtue and honor and morality and a good life. All those things were there. But I also like to focus on some of the other things. So for me, the question about consciousness and how some of the characters can transfer their consciousness into different beings and so on was very fascinating. And but there's just so much there. As I said earlier, in one of the earlier questions, that there's just so much to choose from.
Is anyone in the show or in the books truly evil or truly good, in your opinion?
Well, they break the norms. Most of the characters are a mixture. They do honorable things and then they do horrible things. I suppose Eddard was one of the most honorable characters, and I think Bran is a very honorable character. And truly evil, yeah. I mean, I think maybe Joffrey or Ramsay Bolton for sure.
Mm-hmm.
There's some like that. But most of the main characters, I think that we love. Tyrion and Cersei and Jaime and
even Arya.
And Arya. Arya is one of the great heroes of the book, and as I said, she's my favorite character. But she's murdered a lot of people too. So,
Exactly.
yeah. So, yeah. But that's what makes the characters so fun and so interesting is that, they're not just always doing good or always doing evil, and you don't know what they're going to do next. And sometimes you don't find out why they're doing what they're doing till much later.
The White Walkers seem pretty evil, though.
Yeah, I don't know if I really count them as characters. I mean, they're characters, but they're more of I don't really know how to describe them, a supernatural essence, I guess.
Yeah, well, they're not people either, so that's different.
I don't know.
Yeah,
the White Walker
sure.
rights agencies may have a problem with that.
Their union might be calling you to complain about their representation in the book.
And then the others who create the whites, we don't know a lot about them. They're being portrayed as being evil, but maybe they'll turn out to be the good guys.
Right.
We don't know.
Who knows? One last question from our viewers. I see you've also written a book on House MD. In the course of doing your writing, what kind of parallels between the ethical and philosophical issues in House did you maybe run across with Game of Thrones?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I first was thinking about coming up with a list of topics for Game of Thrones, of course, I didn't think anything about House at that time. I wasn't thinking, gee, what did we do when we did the House book? And at first glance, it seems like the two are just worlds apart. You have this modern day hospital setting, and then you have the medieval fantasy, right? But what's interesting is if you look at the two books, each one has a chapter on Zen, each one has a chapter on moral luck, each one has a chapter on leading a good life and a meaningful life. Each one has a chapter on virtues and character. So it turned out there was quite a bit of overlap. And one really interesting thing too, there's, House is big on medical ethics issues, obviously. And one of the chapters in the Game of Thrones book is about euthanasia. And they talk about, someone says it would have been a mercy to kill Bran. And because of him being crippled, and then that's contrasted with Khal Drogo, who is euthanized, right? And so the author talks about euthanasia through the eyes of those two characters. So that's another overlap. But I thought it was really interesting that it turned out there were a lot of the same topics in books, a lot of different ones too, of course.
The book is called Game of Thrones and Philosophy, Logic Cuts Deeper Than Swords. Henry Jacoby, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us some more. Is there a website or a place people can go to learn more about the book?
Yeah, Wiley has a pop culture and philosophy website where you can read about my book, and you can read about all the books that they have. And I think that's probably the best place. Or you can just look up the book online, and you'll find descriptions of it.
Excellent. And of course, folks, if you missed it, last episode of Sword and Laser, our Game of Thrones special, we had a little time with Henry Jacoby to talk in there as well. So if you liked what you heard here, go watch that. And of course, there's a brand new tabletop from Geek and Sundry coming tomorrow. And we'll be back next week with an all-new Sword and Laser with our guest, Rob Reed, and kicking off a new sci-fi book. We'll see you then.
Sword and Laser.
Thank you for answering a few more questions from our audience.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
Rachel wants to know, in the world of A Song of Ice and Fire, it's incredibly detailed, constant references to food, armor, weapons, and the like. How do you know so much?
Research, reading. You have to read. Whenever I'm going to write a book that has that draws on history to any extent, I kind of immerse myself in the period. And obviously for Ice and Fire, which I've been writing for 20 years now, I've been reading everything I can get my hand on about medieval history for 20 years. Memoirs and popular histories, historical fiction, treatises on things like medieval feasts and tournaments. There's wonderful specific books out there. And of course, the internet is useful for some things too, but for my mind, there's still nothing to take the place of good old-fashioned books. And I love to find new ones and to learn more about these periods. There's always great stuff in there that you can use, and you really have to know it. I like to do this immersion so that when I'm writing and I need to know something, I do know it. Because if you don't know it and you have to kind of stop and look it up, then that sort of takes you out of the moment, and it's hard to recapture the momentum. So the more you can know before you even start to write, the better off you will be, I think.
Do you know about what Neil Stephenson is doing with sword fighting? He's doing a Western martial arts video game.
Clang.
And it's essentially, he's done exactly what you're talking about. He immersed himself in sword fighting with a group of his friends so much that he's now says, I got all this knowledge. We're writing books in that venue. We want to make a real good sword fighting video game.
I have heard a little about that. I don't know a great deal about that, but yeah, I mean, sword fighting, of course, is one of the more interesting things. Most of the great material on sword fighting, of course, no longer exists. I mean, in the actual Middle Ages, there were hundreds of books written about the techniques of sword fighting and how best to do it, and most of them have not survived. They're long gone. And I think a lot of what we see, not only in books but in television and film, and even people who put on displays, is theatrical sword fighting, and it's a lot of fun. It's exciting to watch, but it's not necessarily the real techniques that they used in the real Middle Ages. On the other hand, I'm not sure as a writer that you want to get too realistic about some of these things. There's the famous line about from Liberty Valance, when the truth becomes legend, print's the legend.
Yeah.
So kind of taking it out of the past and the history world and moving it kind of forward into the future, Gord wants to know if you've ever given any thought to what happens in the future world of Westeros and Essos. Is it going to be parallel to our civilization? Is it going to be something else entirely different?
Renaissance, democracies.
Is it going to be steampunky? I don't know. I'm curious if you've ever thought about that.
Well, I have thought about it from time to time. If I have any particularly interesting ideas about it, I may write books about it sometime in the future, but I don't know. That's a long time off. The other possibility is, remember that big red comet from book 2? It might come back and hit the world of Westeros and just kill everybody. So who the hell knows?
No future. Sorry.
That's
Don't
right.
have to worry about it.
When you hang a red comet on the wall, you have to use it. Chekhov would have said.
Yes, that's right. When the gun enters the story, exactly. When the comet enters the story, Chekhov might have said in this case. Do you?
I hope your viewers don't actually take that seriously. I don't want the whole internet to go nuts over the idea that I'm going to wipe out the entire world.
We're going to get all sorts of new fanfic now.
Great, yeah. That actually is one of my favorite parts of the setting of A Song of Ice and Fire, is the seasons. And I know a lot of folks have tried to come up with scientific rationalizations for the seasons. Is that important at all? Do you give thought to that? Or do you just say, this is just the way it is?
I get letters all the time about it, and some people have devoted a lot of thought to it, and they have some very ingenious ideas, and I get letters talking about periods of rotation and axial tilt, and is it a binary star system, and this, that, and the other thing, which, just gives me a headache, because I have to keep writing to them and saying, guys, it's a fantasy. It's a fantasy. If I was writing a science fiction book, yes, then you could send me all these theories about the axial tilt and the binary stars, but it's a fantasy. It's magic.
You know how everyone says hard sci-fi? We could be the first hard fantasy novel where all the magic, well, I'm sure someone's probably done it, where everything that's fantastical about the universe is somehow based in science, I guess. I don't really know how that would work.
Actually, I
think it was Arthur C. Clarke who said sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. But
yeah.
So Casey wants to know if you have any time to do so. What are you currently reading?
What am I currently reading? I'm currently reading, well, talk about history. I'm currently reading a book about Florence in the days of the Medici, and their all the Renaissance intrigue and backstabbing and religious mania and Savonarola, or however you hell will say his name, all of that stuff. So that's a fascinating stuff too.
What's the title of the book?
I haven't started it yet, but I want to read Caliban's War, the second book in James Corey's Expanse series. That's next on my list.
Yeah, we just had Daniel and Ty on Sword and Laser.
Just last week.
The one before, 2 shows ago.
Last full episode ago.
Yeah. before
No,
the last one.
Ty is actually sitting here. He says to say hello to you too.
Oh, yeah,
I have to
say
say
hello to
nice
Ty for
things
us.
about him because he just accepted my Locus Award, and he actually hasn't given it to me yet. So
He's holding on to it for
turns it over
safekeeping.
to me, I have to be nice to Ty.
So he's like, plug Caliban's War. You have to, or you don't get your award.
Something like that, yeah.
Well, Leviathan Wakes may end up being our book pick next week, which is the first book before Caliban's War in the Expanse series. So that's
Oh, really?
still.
Yeah, well, that's a terrific book.
Yeah.
I'm curious about that Medici book because we just finished up Tigana in the book, and of course Guy Gavriel Kay based that on that period of Italian history.
Yeah, the Italian city-states. It's a fascinating story there.
Yeah. Casey
Fascinating story.
or not Casey, sorry. Terp Kristen wants to know if you were stranded on a desert island for a year, what 3 books would you want to have with you?
Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and Return of the King.
Nice. Cover all your bases there. Perfect.
Some purist is going to write in and go, well, actually, those are meant to be one book, so that's only one book.
Oh, jeez.
So don't write us.
Well, actually, George R. R. Martin. So our last question, Crather. Now, this is a theme that's come up in many of our author interviews, so we're curious to see how you respond. Do you have a tabletop role-playing background of any kind? Is that something that's interesting to you? Because many of our authors seem to be going that route and saying that that has informed their world
series
building.
that I mentioned earlier grew out of a role-playing game. That's I've talked about that in numerous introductions and all that. But I started doing tabletop role-playing when I moved to New Mexico in the early 80s, gaming with a group of the local writers, including Melinda Snodgrass and Walter John Williams, Victor Milan, John J. Miller. Roger Zelazny was a member of our group for a number of years. And, that was some of my most cherished memories are role-playing with Roger Zelazny. He was just as creative a gamer and as delightful as he was a writer. I miss him still, but yeah, those were some great games. And I was actually a game master for a few years. I ran Call of Cthulhu, and I ran Super World, the big superhero role-playing game that we played obsessively for like 3 years, and that eventually developed into the Wildcard series.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I think I remember reading that.
And actually, we just had we interviewed another author named Shannon McGuire last night who said she used to play wild cards all the time.
Oh, really? Oh, cool.
Yeah, she also writes under the name Mira Grant, if you see that. Well, I think that does it for us. Justin Robert Young had told me to ask you about Tebow going to the Jets, but I'm a little afraid.
Well, he is on the Jets, but Mark Sanchez is still my quarterback. So.
All right. Thank you, George, for taking the time to chat with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. You're welcome.
We'll be back with an all-new Sword and Laser episode next week. We'll be interviewing Rob Reed, author of Year Zero, as well as kicking off our new book pick. But don't miss the new version of Tabletop with Will Wheaton coming tomorrow right here on the Geek and Sundry channel. We'll see you later.